Montana Territory, 1881. The biting cold of winter had finally released its grip on Wolf Creek, leaving behind a muddy main street that threatened to swallow boots whole if a body wasn't careful where they stepped. Owen Aldridge guided his chestnut mare through the muck with practiced ease, his 6-year-old daughter Lily perched in front of him, her small hands clutching the saddle horn. At 26, Owen was younger than most men who'd already settled with a family, but frontier life had a way of accelerating such things. The premature creases around his eyes spoke of both laughter and sorrow in equal measure, though when he smiled, as he did now at his daughter's excited chatter, the handsome planes of his face softened. His light brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and a week's worth of stubble couldn't hide the strong jawline that had once caught the eye of his late wife. "Papa, can we get sugar candies?" Lily asked, twisting to look up at him with eyes the same hazel as her mother's had been. "We have a list from Mrs. Holloway, little cricket, and candy is not on it," Owen replied, though they both knew he'd likely relent before they left town. He couldn't deny his daughter much, not since Sarah had passed during that terrible fever 2 winters ago. The frontier was no place for a man alone, everyone said so, especially not with a young child, but Owen had decided that was exactly what he would be, alone. Love brought nothing but heartache in the end. He'd had his chance at happiness, and the cruel Montana wilderness had snatched it away. Better to focus on what mattered, keeping Lily safe, their small ranch running, and his heart firmly closed to the possibility of more loss. Wolf Creek's general store appeared ahead, and Owen dismounted before lifting Lily down. "Remember your manners," he reminded her needlessly. For all her spirited nature at home, she was unfailingly polite in town. The bell above the door jingled as they entered the warm interior that smelled of coffee, leather, and the sweet tang of pickles from the barrel near the counter. Mr. Holloway nodded a greeting from where he was weighing flour for another customer. "Look around while I get our supplies," Owen told Lily, who immediately wandered toward a display of colorful ribbons. He was examining a new axe handle when the store's door opened again, bringing with it a gust of spring air and a woman Owen had never seen before. She stood uncertainly in the doorway, clutching a folded piece of paper in gloved hands. Her dark blue traveling dress was of good quality but showed the wrinkles and dust of long journey. She couldn't have been more than 22, with golden blonde hair pinned beneath a modest hat, though several strands had escaped to frame a face that struck Owen as both beautiful and desperately tired. "Can I help you, miss?" Holloway called out, and the woman stepped fully inside, removing her gloves. "I hope so. I'm looking for a property outside of town. I was told you might direct me." Her voice carried the refined tones of the East, but there was a thread of determination running through it that spoke of something more. Owen found himself watching her from beside the tool display, noting the way she squared her shoulders despite her obvious exhaustion. There was something about the set of her jaw that reminded him of the mustangs that sometimes came down from the hills, proud and wary all at once. "That would be the old Randall place, I expect," Holloway said after she showed him the paper. "Not much left of it, I'm afraid. Been abandoned these 3 years since the old man passed. His lawyer's been trying to sell it from back east." "Yes, that's the one," she confirmed. "You planning on staying there?" Holloway asked with poorly disguised disbelief. "All alone?" "I am," she answered simply. Owen couldn't help himself. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but that place is falling down, roof's half gone. No place for a woman alone." She turned to face him fully then, and Owen found himself pinned by eyes the color of summer cornflowers. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Aldridge. Owen Aldridge." "Pearl Randall," she replied, and understanding dawned on Owen's face. "You're kin to old man Randall." His granddaughter, something flickered across her face, grief perhaps, or determination. "I've come to claim my inheritance." Before Owen could respond, Lily appeared at his side, tugging at his coat. "Papa," she whispered, though it was the kind of whisper that carried across the entire store, "that lady looks sad and tired." "Hush, Lily," Owen murmured, embarrassed, but Pearl Randall's expression had already softened at the sight of the child. She crouched down slightly, her skirts pooling around her. "Hello there, what's your name?" "I'm Lily Aldridge, I'm 6.5, his daughter announced proudly. "Did you come on the train?" "We rode the train once, and I got to see buffalo." A genuine smile transformed Pearl's face, erasing years of fatigue in an instant. I did come on the train, all the way from Boston. And I saw plenty of buffalo too. Boston, Lily's eyes widened. That's so far away, why did you come here? Wolf Creek isn't fancy like Boston. Lily, Owen admonished gently, mind your manners. It's quite all right, Pearl assured him. I came because this was my grandfather's home and now it's mine, though I'm beginning to wonder if I've made a terrible mistake. Owen couldn't help noticing how her hands trembled slightly as she straightened up, and something in him, the part that hadn't completely hardened since Sarah's death, stirred with concern. The Randall place is 5 miles out, he said, too far to walk, especially with night coming on, and there's nothing there, no supplies, no firewood chopped. I had arranged for a wagon, but it seems the driver misunderstood when I would arrive. Pearl glanced at the darkening sky through the window, worry creasing her brow. She needs us, Papa, Lily said suddenly, tugging at his hand again. She's all alone, like Mrs. Peterson was before you helped fix her roof. Owen felt trapped between his daughter's innocent compassion and the wall he'd built around his heart. Helping fix a widow's roof was neighborly duty. Taking a strange woman, an undeniably attractive woman, to their home was another matter entirely. I couldn't impose, Pearl said quickly, clearly reading his hesitation. Perhaps there's a boarding house. Closed down last year, Holloway supplied unhelpfully, nearest hotels in Helena. Lily's grip tightened on Owen's hand. She needs us, Papa, she repeated, and something in her simple certainty broke through his reluctance. We have a spare room, he found himself saying. You're welcome to stay the night, Miss Randall. Tomorrow I can help you get out to your property, see what needs doing. The relief in Pearl's eyes was palpable. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Aldridge. Owen, he corrected, already wondering if he'd lost his mind. And there's no need for thanks, it's what neighbors do out here. What he didn't say was that in the 3 years since Sarah's death, he'd never once invited anyone to stay in their home. The spare room had remained closed, a monument to his determination to keep the world and its potential for more heartache at bay. Yet something about this woman's quiet dignity, her determination to face whatever awaited her at that rundown property alone, resonated with him. Perhaps it was simply that he recognized a fellow soul acquainted with loss, or perhaps it was his daughter's innocent plea that had momentarily breached his defenses. Either way, as they loaded Pearl Randall's trunk onto their wagon and headed for home with Lily chattering happily between them, Owen couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The Aldridge Ranch sat nestled in a small valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds by a stand of pines and bordered on one side by a creek that never quite ran dry, even in the height of summer. The modest 2-story house was built of solid logs, with a stone chimney that now sent a column of smoke spiraling into the darkening sky. Pearl sat beside Owen on the wagon bench, Lily between them, and found herself studying the homestead with growing admiration as they approached. The barn and corrals were well maintained, a kitchen garden was freshly turned for spring planting, and chickens scratched contentedly in a fenced yard. It's lovely, she said honestly as Owen brought the wagon to a halt. It's home, he replied simply, but she caught the flicker of pride in his eyes before he jumped down to help them both descend. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. There you are, I was beginning to worry with night coming on, she called, then stopped short at the sight of Pearl. Oh, I didn't realize we had company.
Mrs.
Turner, this is Miss Randall, Owen explained as he helped Lily down. She's come to claim the old Randall property. Miss Randall, this is Mrs. Turner. She helps with Lily and the house a few days each week. The housekeeper's eyes widened. Land's sake, old Henry Randall's granddaughter. Well, I never come in. You must be frozen to the bone after that train journey. Pearl found herself ushered into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and something savory bubbling on the stove. The simple comfort of it brought an unexpected lump to her throat. After weeks of travel, months of uncertainty, and years of grief, the homely scene struck her with an almost physical force. Mrs. Turner makes the best stew in the territory, Lily informed her solemnly as she scrambled onto her chair at the table. And cornbread too. High praise indeed, Pearl smiled, removing her hat and gloves. Owen appeared in the doorway with her trunk. "I'll put this in the spare room. Mrs. Turner, can you show Miss Randall upstairs? Supper in half an hour." Of course, the housekeeper agreed. "Come along, dear, let's get you settled." As Pearl followed Mrs. Turner up the narrow staircase, she couldn't help noticing the framed photographs on the wall, Owen looking younger and more carefree beside a pretty dark-haired woman holding an infant Lily. His wife, Pearl realized with a pang of sympathy. The woman whose absence echoed through this house despite the warmth and care evident in every corner. The spare room was small but spotlessly clean, with a patchwork quilt covering the bed and white curtains framing a window that would, in daylight, overlook the creek. "It isn't fancy," Mrs. Turner said apologetically, "but it's comfortable enough." "It's perfect," Pearl assured her, meaning it. "Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice." The older woman hesitated in the doorway. "If you don't mind me asking, Miss Randall, what brings a young lady like yourself out here alone? The Randall place, well, it's hardly more than a shack now." Pearl sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue. "Necessity, Mrs. Turner, and perhaps a bit of foolish hope." She managed a small smile. "My grandfather and I corresponded for years, though we never met. When he died, I had no idea he'd left me his property. The news came at a time when I needed a fresh start."
Mrs.
Turner's kind face softened with understanding. "Well, you get yourself washed up. There's water in the pitcher there. Dinner will restore you some. We can talk about fresh starts tomorrow." Left alone, Pearl moved to the window and gazed out at the twilight settling over the Montana landscape. So different from the crowded streets of Boston, from the memories that had driven her west with little more than determination and her grandfather's deed. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, the first flicker of real doubt creeping in. The property she'd inherited was clearly in worse condition than she'd been led to believe. Her savings, while adequate for the journey and basic supplies, would not stretch to rebuilding a derelict homestead. And yet, the alternative, returning east in defeat, facing the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her since Daniel's betrayal and her father's financial ruin, was unthinkable. Pearl straightened her shoulders and turned from the window. One night of kindness from strangers didn't change her circumstances, but it had given her breathing room. Tomorrow, she would face whatever awaited her at her grandfather's homestead. For now, she would be grateful for warm food, a clean bed, and the unexpected kindness of a solemn cowboy and his perceptive daughter. Dinner proved to be exactly what Mrs. Turner had promised, a hearty stew rich with vegetables and tender beef, accompanied by golden cornbread that melted in Pearl's mouth. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite, and then found herself eating with an enthusiasm that might have embarrassed her in Boston society, but seemed perfectly acceptable at the Aldridge table. "Papa says hungry is the best sauce," Lily informed her, clearly delighted by Pearl's appreciation of the meal. "Your papa is very wise," Pearl replied, catching Owen's gaze across the table. A brief smile crossed his face before he looked down at his plate again. Throughout the meal, Pearl found herself studying her host when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet competence about Owen Aldridge that she found compelling. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and direct. His hands, though calloused from ranch work, were gentle when he passed the bread or refilled her water glass. And the way he listened to his daughter's enthusiastic tales of their day in town revealed a patience and tenderness that contrasted with his otherwise reserved demeanor. After dinner, Mrs. Turner departed for her own cottage nearby, leaving Pearl to help with the dishes despite Owen's protests. "You're a guest," he insisted, taking a plate from her hands. "I'm an unexpected imposition," she corrected him with a small smile. "The least I can do is help clean up after enjoying such a wonderful meal." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or reluctant admiration. "All right then, you wash, I'll dry. Lily, time to get ready for bed." "But Papa," the little girl protested, "I want to talk more with Miss Pearl. She hasn't told me about Boston yet." "Miss Randall is tired from her journey," Owen said firmly. "There will be time for stories tomorrow." Pearl felt a rush of warmth at the implied invitation to stay another night, though she knew she should insist on seeing her property the next day, regardless of its condition. "Tell you what," she told Lily, crouching down to the child's level. You get ready for bed now, and tomorrow I'll tell you all about the ships in Boston Harbor and the time I saw the president give a speech." Lily's eyes widened. "You saw the president, really truly?" "Really truly," Pearl confirmed. "Now scoot along like your father asked." With a delighted grin, Lily hugged Pearl impulsively before dashing off to her room, leaving Pearl momentarily speechless at the child's easy affection. "Sorry about that," Owen said as he handed her a dish towel. "She's not usually so forward with strangers." "Please don't apologize, she's delightful." Pearl began washing the dishes, grateful for the simple, familiar task. "You've done a wonderful job raising her, especially," she trailed off, uncertain if she should acknowledge what she had surmised. "Especially since her mother died," Owen finished for her, his voice carefully neutral. "It's no secret. Sarah caught the fever 3 winters back, half the town did. She was one of the 12 who didn't recover." Pearl's heart ached for the matter-of-fact way he stated such a devastating loss. "I'm very sorry, it must have been incredibly difficult." Owen was silent for a moment, methodically drying a plate. "Life out here is hard," he finally said. "You build what happiness you can and learn to endure when it's taken from you." The quiet resignation in his voice struck Pearl deeply. It was the philosophy of a man who had loved and lost, who expected little from life beyond survival. "Is that why you're here?" Owen asked suddenly, looking for something to build. "Or running from something taken from you?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In Boston, such personal inquiries would have been considered the height of rudeness. But here, with soapy water up to her wrists and the mountain night pressing against the windows, the normal rules seemed suspended. "Both, I suppose," Pearl admitted. "My father was ruined in a banking scandal last year, falsely accused, but the damage was done. He died of heart failure shortly after. My fiancée decided a disgraced banker's daughter no longer suited his political ambitions." She kept her voice steady with effort. "When my grandfather's lawyer contacted me about this inheritance, it seemed like Providence." Owen handed her a towel to dry her hands. "Sounds to me like you're better off without that fiancé." A startled laugh escaped her. "Yes, as it turns out, though it didn't feel that way at the time." "Papa," Lily's voice called from her bedroom. "I'm ready for my story." Owen smiled apologetically. "Duty calls, make yourself comfortable by the fire, I won't be long." Left alone in the kitchen, Pearl finished the last of the dishes and then wandered into the small sitting room, where a fire crackled in the stone hearth. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with well-worn volumes that spoke of actual reading rather than mere display. She ran her fingers along the spines, finding an eclectic mix of practical manuals, history, and literature. A book of Tennyson's poetry caught her eye and she carefully pulled it from the shelf. Opening it revealed a feminine hand on the flyleaf. "To Owen, who finds poetry in the land itself, all my love, Sarah." Pearl quickly closed the book and returned it to its place, feeling like an intruder on private grief. As she turned away, her gaze fell on a small desk in the corner, where several sheets of paper lay beside a pen and inkwell. One appeared to be a letter half-finished, and though she would never have deliberately read someone's private correspondence, a phrase caught her eye, regarding the sale of the ranch. Owen was planning to sell his beautiful home. The thought troubled her, though she had no right to any opinion on the matter. Still, it seemed impossible that anyone would willingly leave such a lovingly tended place. The sound of footsteps on the stairs warned her of Owen's return, and Pearl quickly moved to sit in one of the armchairs by the fire. "She's asking for you," Owen said as he entered the room. "Would you mind saying good night?" "Of course not," Pearl replied, rising immediately. Lily's bedroom was exactly what Pearl would have expected for a 6-year-old girl on a frontier ranch, practical yet touched with whimsy. A handmade rag doll sat on the pillow beside her, and colorful paper flowers decorated the windowsill. "Miss Pearl," Lily exclaimed happily, "Papa said you might come say good night." "I wouldn't miss it," Pearl said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thank you for convincing your father to help me today. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "Papa helps everybody," Lily informed her seriously. "He's the best papa in the whole territory. But sometimes he gets sad when he thinks I'm not looking." Pearl's heart constricted at the child's perceptiveness. Well, I think it's very normal to be sad sometimes, especially when we miss people we love. Lily nodded solemnly, like Mama. I don't remember her much, but Papa tells me stories, and Mrs. Turner says she's watching over us from heaven. She yawned widely. Are you going to stay with us, Miss Pearl? Just until I can get my grandfather's house fixed up, Pearl explained gently. But that might take forever, Lily said, her expression brightening. The roof is all broken and there's probably mice, and Papa says the well needs cleaning out. Pearl couldn't help but laugh. Are you trying to discourage me from moving to my own home, Miss Lily? The little girl's cheeks flushed. I just think you should stay here. Papa smiles more when you're around. I saw him at dinner. Before Pearl could formulate a response to this startling observation, Owen appeared in the doorway. Time for sleep, Cricket. You can talk Miss Randall's ear off tomorrow. Good night, Lily, Pearl said, tucking the blanket around the child's shoulders. Sweet dreams. Night, Miss Pearl, night, Papa. In the hallway, Pearl felt suddenly self-conscious under Owen's watchful gaze. She's a remarkable child, she said quietly. She is, he agreed, then hesitated. Look, I hope she didn't say anything to make you uncomfortable. She has a tendency to speak her mind. Not at all, Pearl assured him. It's refreshing, actually. In Boston, people rarely say what they're thinking. They descended the stairs together, and Pearl was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the faint scent of soap and leather, the careful way he kept a proper distance between them. Would you like coffee? He offered as they reached the sitting room. Or perhaps something stronger. I have a bottle of brandy for medicinal purposes. Pearl smiled at his careful phrasing. Coffee would be lovely, thank you. While Owen busied himself in the kitchen, Pearl returned to the armchair by the fire, trying to sort through the tumult of emotions the day had brought. Exhaustion, gratitude, anxiety about tomorrow, and an unexpected warmth whenever her host's hazel eyes met hers, all swirled together in a confusing mixture. Here you are, Owen said, returning with 2 steaming cups. He settled in the chair opposite hers, the firelight playing across his features. I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Randall. Pearl, please, she corrected him. After eating at your table and meeting your daughter, I think we can dispense with formalities. He inclined his head. Pearl, then, as I was saying, I rode by your grandfather's place about a month ago. It needs considerable work to be habitable. The roof has partially collapsed and there's likely water damage inside. Pearl's heart sank, though she had been bracing herself for bad news. I see. Well, I suppose I'll need to find someone who can make repairs, and somewhere to stay while that happens. There's more, Owen said, his expression troubled. The Blackfoot sometimes hunt in that valley. They've been peaceful these past few years, but they consider that land part of their territory. Your grandfather had an understanding with them, but I'm a stranger, Pearl finished for him. A woman alone. It's not just that, Owen set his coffee down, leaning forward earnestly. That land is isolated. Nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. Winter comes early and hard in that valley. Even for an experienced frontiersman, it would be a challenge to survive there alone. Pearl felt her carefully constructed plans crumbling. What are you suggesting, Mr. Aldridge? That I sell the property and return east with my tail between my legs. Owen, he reminded her with a slight smile, and no, that's not what I'm suggesting at all. I think you should stay here at least until you've seen the property and can make an informed decision. Mrs. Turner could use help with the household, and Lily, he paused. Well, Lily has taken a shine to you already. That's very generous, Pearl said carefully, but I couldn't impose indefinitely, and I have no intention of becoming someone's housekeeper, even temporarily. Not a housekeeper, Owen corrected quickly. A guest who contributes, and in exchange, I'll help you assess what needs to be done at your property. Perhaps we can come up with a plan that doesn't involve you living alone in a half-collapsed cabin. Pearl studied him over the rim of her cup. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? Owen's gaze dropped to the fire, because Lily was right earlier. You need help, and out here we help our neighbors. He looked up again, meeting her eyes directly, and because I know what it's like to face an uncertain future alone. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their vastly different backgrounds. Pearl found herself nodding slowly. "All right," she agreed, "a temporary arrangement until I can determine what's to be done with my inheritance." "Good," Owen said, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. "We'll ride out to your property tomorrow, see what we're dealing with." As they sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, Pearl couldn't help wondering if she had just made a terrible mistake or the wisest decision of her life. Only time would tell. The morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of warmth that promised spring was truly on its way. Pearl woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life already in full swing, a rooster crowing, cattle lowing, the rhythmic chunk of an axe splitting wood. For a moment, disoriented from weeks of travel, she couldn't place where she was. Then the events of the previous day rushed back, the arrival in Wolf Creek, the unexpected kindness of Owen and Lily Aldridge, the agreement to stay until she could assess her property. Pearl dressed quickly in her most practical outfit, a navy skirt and white shirtwaist that had seen better days but would serve for ranch exploration. She twisted her blonde hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck, foregoing the elaborate style she might have worn in Boston. Downstairs, she found Lily already at the kitchen table, eating porridge with enthusiasm while Mrs. Turner packed what appeared to be a picnic basket. "Good morning, Miss Pearl," Lily greeted her cheerfully. "Papa says we're all going to see your grandfather's house today. I've never been there before. Is it big? Does it have a secret passage?" Jenny Mitchell says old houses sometimes have secret passages. Pearl laughed as she accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Turner. "I've never seen it myself, so I'm not sure about secret passages. But from what your father tells me, it might be more of an adventure than a comfortable visit."
Mr.
Aldridge rode out at dawn to check the herd, Mrs. Turner explained, adding biscuits to the basket. "He'll be back shortly to take you to the Randall place. I've packed enough for a midday meal. No telling what you'll find out there, but it won't include a cooking stove in working order, that's certain." "You're very kind, Mrs. Turner," Pearl said sincerely. "I appreciate all this preparation." The older woman waved off her thanks. "Been looking after the Aldridges since Miss Lily was born. Adding one more to feed is no trouble." She gave Pearl an appraising look. "It's good to see a young woman around here again. This house has been too quiet these past years." Before Pearl could respond to this rather pointed observation, the back door opened and Owen entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He'd clearly been up for hours but had taken time to clean up before returning. His hair was damp at the temples, and he wore a fresh shirt under his worn leather vest. "Good morning," he greeted them, his eyes lingering momentarily on Pearl before moving to his daughter. "Finished with breakfast, Cricket? Go wash your face and hands if you're coming with us." "Yes, Papa." Lily scrambled down from her chair and darted from the room. "I hope it's all right that she joins us," Owen said to Pearl. "She's been talking about nothing else since she woke up, but if you'd prefer to assess the property without a 6-year-old's commentary." "Not at all," Pearl assured him. "I'd be delighted to have Lily along, though I'm a bit nervous about what we might find given your description." "Best you see it with clear eyes," Owen replied, pouring himself coffee. "No point sugarcoating it. The place needs work, no question, but land is land and that valley has good water and grazing." "You sound like you admire the property despite its condition," Pearl observed. A shadow crossed Owen's face. "Henry Randall was a good man, helped me when I first came to this territory, taught me about ranching. His land has potential, but it would take capital and labor to realize it, things he was short on in his later years." Pearl considered this as she finished her coffee. She had some capital, not a fortune, but enough that she'd hoped to establish herself independently. Labor was another matter entirely. She knew next to nothing about ranching or farming, despite having read several books on the subject during the train journey west. Lily returned, face shining from its washing and practically bouncing with excitement. Within minutes, Owen had loaded the picnic basket into the wagon, helped both Lily and Pearl onto the bench seat, and taken up the reins. The April morning was glorious, the kind that made Pearl understand why people braved the harsh Montana winters for springs like this. Wildflowers dotted the grasslands, and in the distance, snow-capped mountains stood sentinel against a sky so blue it seemed unreal to her eastern eyes. It's beautiful, she breathed, taking in the vast landscape. Different from Boston, I expect, Owen commented, guiding the horses along a rutted trail that branched from the main road. Completely, Pearl agreed. Everything there is so. Contained, buildings pressing in on all sides, people everywhere. Here you can breathe. Look, Miss Pearl, Lily pointed excitedly. Deer. Sure enough, a small group of deer grazed in a meadow to their right, lifting their heads curiously as the wagon passed before returning to their breakfast. For the next hour, Owen pointed out local landmarks as they traveled: a rock formation that marked the boundary of Wolf Creek territory, the distant smudge of smoke that indicated the Thompson family homestead, a stand of trees where wild berries would ripen by midsummer. Pearl tried to absorb it all but found herself equally distracted by the man beside her. In daylight, away from the confines of the house, Owen seemed more at ease. He answered Lily's constant questions with patience, occasionally allowing a dry humor to surface that made Pearl smile. Once or twice, she caught him watching her reactions to the landscape with an expression she couldn't quite decipher: assessment, perhaps, or simple curiosity about how an Eastern woman viewed his beloved territory. There it is, he said finally as they crested a small rise, the Randall place. Pearl's heart sank as the homestead came into view. Oh, was all she could manage. The cabin, for it was indeed more cabin than house, listed slightly to one side, its roof partially collapsed on the western end. What had once been a barn was now little more than a framework of weathered timbers. A stone well stood in the yard, its winch rusted and broken. The surrounding fence had fallen in multiple places, and what must have once been a garden was now overgrown with weeds and wild grass. Yet despite its dilapidated state, Pearl could see why her grandfather had chosen this spot. The cabin sat on a slight elevation, offering views across a pretty valley with a creek winding through it. Stands of aspen and pine provided windbreaks and the promise of shade in summer, and the mountains rising in the distance created a backdrop of breathtaking beauty. It's fixable, Owen said quietly, clearly reading her dismay. Not easily or cheaply, but fixable. It looks like a giant stepped on it, Lily observed innocently, making both adults laugh despite the sobering sight. That's an accurate assessment, Miss Lily, Pearl agreed, grateful for the child's frankness. She took a deep breath. Well, shall we take a closer look at my inheritance? Owen secured the horses and helped them both down from the wagon. As they approached the cabin, Pearl tried to see beyond the current state to what it might have been, what it could be again with sufficient investment of time and resources. The door hung crookedly on one hinge, and Owen carefully removed it entirely before allowing them to enter. Watch your step, he cautioned, and Lily, stay close, no wandering off. The interior was a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end. A ladder led to what appeared to be a small loft space overhead. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating dust motes and casting dappled patterns on the rough plank floor. To Pearl's surprise, much of the furniture remained: a table and chairs, a bed frame with a rotted mattress, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair that had somehow survived the elements better than the structure around it. Grandfather's things, she murmured, running her hand along the back of the rocking chair. I never met him, you know. My mother left Montana before I was born, married my father against her parents' wishes. They reconciled through letters when I was about Lily's age. Owen nodded, examining the fireplace and chimney with a critical eye. Henry mentioned once he had a daughter back east, never knew he had a granddaughter though. He sent me books about Montana, Pearl recalled, smiling at the memory, and once a pressed wildflower collection. I think he hoped I might visit someday, but my parents, she trailed off. Well, Boston society has very fixed ideas about what's proper for a young lady. And now here you are anyway, Owen observed, turning to face her. Yes, Pearl agreed softly, here I am anyway. Their eyes held for a long moment, and Pearl felt something stir within her, a recognition, perhaps, that they were both products of circumstances they hadn't chosen, both making the best of hands they'd been dealt. The moment was broken by Lily's excited voice from the corner of the cabin. Papa, Miss Pearl, look what I found. They turned to find the little girl holding up a small wooden box that she'd discovered on a shelf built into the wall. It has pretty carvings on it, she explained, bringing it carefully to Pearl. The box was indeed beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers, the same ones, Pearl realized with a jolt, that her grandfather had sent her pressed between pages all those years ago. "May I?" she asked Lily, who nodded and handed over her discovery. With trembling fingers, Pearl opened the box. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, a small leather pouch, and a worn silver pocket watch. She carefully unfolded the paper to find her grandfather's spidery handwriting. "For Pearl, if she ever comes west," she read aloud, her voice catching. "My legacy is small, but it comes with all the love I couldn't give in person." Owen placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Come on, Cricket. Let's give Miss Pearl a moment, we'll check on the well." As they stepped outside, Pearl continued reading the short letter. Her grandfather had known he was dying when he wrote it, hoping against hope that his granddaughter might someday claim the property he'd worked all his life to build. The pouch contained a few gold coins, not a fortune but enough to make a start. And the watch had been his father's, the only family heirloom he had to pass on. Tears blurred Pearl's vision as she carefully refolded the letter. She had come west seeking escape and a fresh start, but found instead a connection to family she'd never fully appreciated in life. By the time Owen and Lily returned, she had composed herself, though her eyes remained damp. "The well needs cleaning out," Owen reported, "but there's water down there, good water from what I remember." Pearl nodded, tucking the box under her arm. "Thank you for checking, and thank you for bringing me here today."
I needed to see it for myself.
And Owen asked, his expression carefully neutral. "What are your thoughts now that you have?" Pearl gazed around the cabin, seeing both its current state and its potential. "I think my grandfather believed I would come someday. And I think I owe it to his memory to at least try to make something of this place." She straightened her shoulders. "But I'm not foolish enough to believe I can do it alone. I'll need help, experienced help." "You'll have it," Owen said simply. "From me, from others in Wolf Creek. That's how we survive out here together." The word hung in the air between them, full of meaning beyond its simple definition. Together. Something neither of them had expected to be again after their respective losses. "Picnic time," Lily suggested hopefully, breaking the tension that had built without either adult quite realizing it. Pearl laughed, grateful for the child's perfect timing. "An excellent idea. Shall we eat by the creek? It looks lovely." They spread Mrs. Turner's picnic on a blanket beneath an old cottonwood tree near the creek. The simple meal of cold chicken, biscuits, and apple preserves tasted better to Pearl than any fancy dinner she'd ever eaten in Boston. Perhaps it was the fresh air, or the sense of possibility that had begun to take root despite the daunting task ahead. Or perhaps it was the company, Lily's infectious enthusiasm and Owen's quiet strength creating a sense of safety she hadn't felt since before her father's disgrace. After they ate, Lily convinced her father to help her build a small dam in the creek, leaving Pearl to wander the property alone. She tried to envision what it might become with proper care. A garden here, repairs to the barn there, perhaps eventually a few cattle or sheep grazing in the meadow. It was a far cry from the life she'd once expected to lead as the wife of an up-and-coming Boston politician. But as she watched Owen showing Lily how to place stones to redirect the water flow, their heads bent together in concentration, Pearl couldn't help thinking that perhaps fate had led her west for reasons beyond mere economic necessity. The ride back to the Aldridge ranch was quieter, with Lily dozing between them and Pearl lost in thoughts of possibilities and challenges. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grasslands, painting the landscape in gold and amber tones that made even the most ordinary features seem magical. "Thank you again for today," Pearl said as the ranch came into view. "You've given me a much clearer picture of what I'm facing." Owen glanced at her, his expression softened by the evening light. "And, have you decided what you'll do?" Pearl considered her answer carefully. "I think I'd like to try to restore the property, make it livable at least. Not immediately perhaps, I'll need to learn more about ranching, about surviving out here. And I'll need to earn some money for materials." "Wolf Creek could use a schoolteacher," Owen suggested. "The last one left at Christmas married a cattle buyer from Helena. Town council's been looking for a replacement." "I taught briefly in Boston," Pearl admitted, surprised by the idea. "At a girls' finishing school, not quite the same as a frontier schoolhouse, I imagine." Reading, writing, and figures are the same everywhere, Owen pointed out. And you'd have a steady income while you plan your next steps. The position comes with a small house in town, too. The idea took root immediately in Pearl's mind. Teaching had been one of the few respectable options available to her after her father's disgrace, and she had genuinely enjoyed it. Do you think they'd consider me an outsider? They'd be fools not to, Owen said with unexpected vehemence. Then, more moderately, Wolf Creek needs educated people willing to put down roots. If you're interested, I can speak to the town council chairman tomorrow. I'd appreciate that, Pearl said, feeling a new sense of purpose taking shape. It seems I have more options than I realized when I stepped off that train yesterday. Owen's smile was brief but genuine. The frontiers like that, hardship and opportunity side by side. He glanced down at his sleeping daughter. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most difficult circumstances. Pearl followed his gaze to Lily's peaceful face, understanding that he spoke from profound personal experience. Yes, she agreed softly, I'm beginning to see that. As they pulled up to the ranch house, the last rays of sunlight gilding its sturdy log walls, Pearl felt a strange sense of homecoming, peculiar for a place she'd known less than 24 hours. Yet something about the Aldridge ranch, with its ordered domesticity and quiet beauty, called to a part of her soul she hadn't known was listening. I'll take care of the horses, Owen said as he helped her down from the wagon. Can you manage Lily? Of course, Pearl replied, gathering the sleeping child carefully in her arms. Lily stirred but didn't wake, instead nestling her head against Pearl's shoulder with complete trust. The weight of the child, the small puffs of breath against her neck, created an ache of longing in Pearl's chest that surprised her with its intensity. A family, a home filled with love, was what she had once hoped for with Daniel. Now, carrying another woman's child into a home built with another woman's love, Pearl felt both the sharp edge of what she had lost and a flicker of hope for what might still be possible. Mrs. Turner had left a lamp burning in the kitchen and a note saying she'd return in the morning. The house was quiet and warm, welcoming them back from their expedition. I'll put her to bed, Pearl whispered as Owen joined her in the hallway. If that's all right. He nodded, something unreadable flickering in his eyes as he watched Pearl carry Lily up the stairs. It felt strangely intimate, this domestic task, more so than sharing meals or conversation had been. In Lily's bedroom, Pearl carefully removed the child's shoes and outer clothing, leaving her in her cotton underdress. Lily stirred as Pearl tucked the quilt around her. Miss Pearl, she murmured sleepily. Are you going to stay with us forever? Pearl's heart contracted. I'm staying for now, sweetheart, sleep tight. I hope it's forever, Lily mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. Papa smiles when you're here. He didn't smile for a very long time after Mama went to heaven. Pearl gently smoothed the hair from Lily's forehead, at a loss for how to respond to such innocent honesty. Good night, Lily, she whispered and slipped from the room. She found Owen in the sitting room, building up the fire against the evening chill. He glanced up as she entered. She go down all right. Like a little angel, Pearl confirmed, taking a seat in what she already thought of as her armchair. She's a remarkable child, Owen. You've done an amazing job raising her. He shook his head slightly, poking at the fire with more force than necessary. Not me, Sarah was the one who knew how to parent. I'm just trying not to make too many mistakes. I think that's the definition of good parenting, Pearl observed gently. And from what I can see, you haven't made many. Owen straightened up, dusting his hands on his trousers. Would you like tea, or I could open that brandy I mentioned? Tea would be lovely, thank you, Pearl replied, recognizing his need to change the subject. While he busied himself in the kitchen, Pearl found herself studying the half-finished letter she'd noticed the night before, still lying on the small desk. This time, she couldn't resist reading the visible portion. Regarding the sale of the ranch, after careful consideration, I must decline your offer. While the price is fair, I've decided that Lily needs stability more than I need a fresh start. This is her home, the only one she's known, and the rest disappeared beneath another sheet of paper, but what Pearl had read was enough to fill her with unexpected relief. Owen had considered selling, but chosen to stay for his daughter's sake. The knowledge settled something within her, a worry she hadn't fully acknowledged until it was resolved. "Here we are," Owen said, returning with 2 steaming cups. If he noticed her standing near his desk, he gave no indication. "Mrs. Turner leaves a jar of honey on the shelf for tea. I know most ladies prefer it sweetened." "Thank you," Pearl said, accepting the cup and returning to her chair. "I've been thinking about your suggestion about the teaching position. I'd like to pursue it if you're still willing to speak to the council chairman." Owen nodded, taking the seat opposite. "Good. Wolf Creek needs a proper teacher, and it would give you time to plan for your property. Speaking of which," he hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I'd be willing to help with the repairs, not charity," he added quickly. "An exchange. I could use the lumber from your deadfall trees, and in return I'd fix the roof and structural problems." Pearl studied him over the rim of her cup, trying to determine if there was more to the offer than simple frontier pragmatism. "That's very generous." "Practical," he corrected. "Good lumber is valuable out here, and a solid roof is the first step to making that place livable." "Then I accept," Pearl said decisively, "on one condition." Owen raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you let me learn alongside you. I didn't come west to be helpless or decorative. If I'm going to survive here, I need to understand how things work." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, transforming his usually solemn features. "Miss Randall, I believe you may be too sensible for Boston society." Pearl couldn't help laughing. "Oh, I assure you, that became abundantly clear to everyone involved long before I left." The tension that had built between them dissolved into comfortable conversation as they finished their tea. Owen told her more about Wolf Creek and its inhabitants, the town doctor who also served as mayor, the general store owner who'd once been a professor back east, the colorful assortment of ranchers and miners who made up the community. In turn, Pearl shared stories of Boston, the libraries and theaters, the political intrigues, the stifling social expectations that had never quite fit her curious nature. "It sounds like you were meant for somewhere else all along," Owen observed as the mantel clock struck 10. "Perhaps," Pearl agreed, setting down her empty cup. "Though I never imagined somewhere else would be a half-collapsed cabin in Montana territory." "Life rarely turns out as we imagine," Owen said, and there was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet acceptance that Pearl found herself admiring. "Sometimes it's better. And sometimes it's worse," she countered softly, "but we endure either way." Their eyes met across the space between their chairs, and Pearl felt again that current of understanding that had been building since her arrival. They were two people shaped by loss, by expectations shattered and futures reimagined. Yet here they sat, finding unexpected common ground in a quiet evening conversation. "I should turn in," Pearl said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "If we're going to speak to the council chairman tomorrow." Owen nodded, rising to take her cup. "I'll ride into town after the morning chores. You're welcome to come along or stay here with Mrs. Turner and Lily." "I'll come," Pearl decided. Better for the council to see who they're considering firsthand. "Sensible," Owen agreed, and there was that smile again, brief but genuine, warming his eyes in a way that made Pearl's heart beat a little faster. "Good night, Miss Randall." "Pearl," she reminded him, "and good night, Owen." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Pearl felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation about the days ahead. In just 48 hours, her world had expanded beyond recognition, from the narrow constraints of disgrace in Boston society to the wide-open possibilities of the Montana frontier. And at the center of this new world, unexpected as sunrise in the west, stood Owen Aldridge with his quiet strength and guarded heart, a man who had suffered his own losses, who understood what it meant to rebuild from ashes. A man, Pearl admitted to herself as she prepared for bed, who had already begun to occupy far too large a space in her thoughts. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity for Pearl. The town council had indeed been eager to secure her services as a teacher, and she found herself installed in the small but comfortable schoolhouse on the edge of Wolf Creek, with living quarters in the attached residence. The transition from student to resident had been remarkably smooth, facilitated in no small part by Owen's standing in the community. When he vouched for Pearl's character and abilities, the council members had nodded respectfully and asked few questions beyond her educational qualifications. Pearl discovered that frontier education was both simpler and more complex than teaching at a Boston finishing school. Her pupils ranged from 6 to 16, with varying levels of previous schooling. Some, like the banker's children, were quite advanced in reading and mathematics. Others, particularly those from outlying ranches and farms, had received only sporadic instruction. Yet all shared a hunger for knowledge that Pearl found deeply rewarding. There were no pretensions here, no parents demanding their children be taught only what would make them marriageable or socially acceptable. Instead, there was genuine appreciation for practical learning, reading that would allow them to understand contracts and newspapers, writing that would connect them to distant relatives, arithmetic that would help them manage crops and herds. When school ended each day, Pearl often found Lily waiting for her, having been delivered by Mrs. Turner or occasionally by Owen himself. These latter instances became highlights of Pearl's week, brief moments when Owen would lean against the schoolhouse door frame, hat in hand, watching his daughter chatter excitedly about her day while Pearl gathered her teaching materials. On weekends, true to his word, Owen would take Pearl to her grandfather's property to work on repairs. He had enlisted several men from Wolf Creek to help with the major structural work, exchanging lumber rights for labor in the frontier tradition of community assistance. Pearl insisted on participating in every aspect of the restoration she could physically manage. She learned to mix mortar for the chimney repairs, to identify which boards were salvageable and which were too rotted to save, to handle tools that had never been part of a Boston lady's education. "You're a natural," Owen told her one Saturday as they worked side by side, replacing weathered siding on the cabin's eastern wall. "Most city folks take months to adapt to frontier work." "I'm motivated," Pearl replied, wiping sweat from her brow with her sleeve, another action that would have horrified her former social circle. "And I have a good teacher." Owen smiled at that, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, something Pearl had noticed happening with increasing frequency. When she'd first arrived, his expressions of happiness had been reserved almost exclusively for Lily. Now they seemed to come more readily, particularly when the three of them were together. For her part, Pearl found herself looking forward to these weekend work sessions with an eagerness that had little to do with property restoration. She enjoyed Owen's company, his dry humor, his patient explanations, his quiet competence in all things related to frontier survival. She admired the way he interacted with Lily, never dismissing the child's questions or contributions, always finding ways to include her in their activities. And sometimes, when their hands accidentally touched passing a tool, or when they stood side by side admiring the day's progress, Pearl felt a jolt of awareness that left her both exhilarated and terrified. It was one such moment, nearly a month after her arrival in Wolf Creek, that shifted the careful balance they had established. They had been working on the cabin's interior, replacing floorboards in what would eventually become Pearl's bedroom. Lily had stayed in town with Mrs. Turner, who was teaching her to make apple tarts, a prospect that had thrilled the child far more than watching adults hammer nails all day. "That should do it," Owen said, driving in the final nail. He sat back on his heels, surveying their work with satisfaction. "Solid enough to last another 20 years, I'd say." "Just in time," Pearl observed, glancing at the gathering clouds outside the newly repaired window. "Looks like we're in for a storm." Owen followed her gaze and frowned. "You're right. We should head back before it hits. Mountain storms can turn dangerous quickly." They hurried to pack their tools, but before they could finish, the first heavy raindrops began to fall. By the time they reached the wagon, the sky had opened in a deluge that instantly soaked them both. "We can't travel in this," Owen shouted over the downpour. "The creek ford will be too dangerous. We'll have to wait it out." They dashed back to the cabin, which now at least had a sound roof and solid walls, though it remained sparsely furnished with only the pieces they'd managed to salvage and repair. Inside, they stood dripping on the new floorboards, both laughing breathlessly at their predicament. "Well," Pearl said, pushing wet hair from her face, "at least we can confirm the roof doesn't leak." Owen's laughter faded as he looked at her, and something in his expression made Pearl's heart beat faster. She became acutely aware of how her sodden shirtwaist clung to her figure, how close they stood in the small space. "You're shivering," he observed, his voice lower than usual. "Am I?" Pearl hadn't noticed, though now she felt the tremor running through her, from cold or something else entirely, she wasn't certain. "We should get you warm." Owen moved to the fireplace they'd recently rebuilt. "Fortunately, I left some kindling and logs here last week." He had a fire crackling in short order, its warm glow chasing the storm shadows from the cabin. Pearl stood as close as she dared, grateful for the heat but still uncomfortably drenched. "Here," Owen said, shrugging out of his jacket and draping it around her shoulders. "It's wet too, but it might help." The weight of it settled around her, heavy with rainwater but carrying his scent, leather and sawdust, and something uniquely Owen. "Thank you," she managed, "but now you'll be cold." He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm used to worse, been caught in blizzards that make this look like a spring shower." Pearl studied him in the firelight, the strong planes of his face, the way his wet shirt clung to broad shoulders shaped by years of ranch work, the gentle concern in his eyes as he watched her warm herself. "Owen," she said softly, then found she didn't know how to continue. "Yes." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see droplets of rain still clinging to his eyelashes. Pearl hesitated, torn between propriety and the feelings that had been building within her for weeks. "I want to thank you for everything you've done since I arrived. You could have simply given me directions to my grandfather's property that first day and sent me on my way." "I couldn't have done that," Owen said quietly. "Why not?" Pearl asked, needing to hear him say it. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then back to her face. "Because from the moment you stepped into Holloway's store, something in me recognized something in you, a kind of kinship." His voice dropped lower. "And because my daughter was right that day, you needed us." "I did," Pearl acknowledged. "I still do, but I think perhaps you needed someone too. Someone besides Lily, I mean." Owen's expression grew more serious. "After Sarah died, I decided I'd never need anyone again, not that way. That Lily was enough, would always be enough." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong." The simple admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to voice directly. "I came west believing I could be completely self-sufficient," Pearl confessed, "that I didn't need anyone after what happened in Boston. I was wrong too." Outside, thunder rumbled across the valley, but inside the cabin, time seemed suspended as they stood before the fire, rain-soaked and confronting truths they'd both been avoiding. "Pearl," Owen said finally, reaching out to brush a strand of wet hair from her cheek. The touch was featherlight, but it sent warmth cascading through her body. "I'm not good with words, never have been. But these past weeks, having you and Lily in the schoolhouse working alongside you here, it's changed things for me." Pearl's breath caught. "Changed things how?" "Made me remember what it's like to look forward to tomorrow," he said simply. "Made me think about possibilities I'd told myself were closed forever." Pearl found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the quiet intensity in his voice. "What possibilities?" Instead of answering with words, Owen closed the remaining distance between them and kissed her. It was tentative at first, as if he expected her to pull away. But when Pearl's arms slid around his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming an eloquent expression of everything they'd left unspoken. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Pearl kept her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. "That was," she searched for the right word, "overdue," Owen supplied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Pearl laughed softly. "Yes. Definitely overdue." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but they hardly noticed as they sat before the fire, talking more openly than ever before. Owen spoke of his life with Sarah, of the devastating grief that had followed her death, of his fear of opening himself to that kind of pain again. Pearl shared the humiliation of Daniel's betrayal, her father's tragic end, the gossip and ostracism that had driven her west. As the afternoon wore on, the rain gradually subsided, though the creek would still be too high to ford safely. They shared the simple lunch Mrs. Turner had packed for them, sitting side by side on a bench Owen had fashioned from salvaged lumber. "What happens now?" Pearl asked eventually, voicing the question that hovered between them. Owen considered before answering. That depends on what you want, Pearl. I know you came here for independence, to build something that's entirely your own. I wouldn't ask you to give that up.
Pearl appreciated his understanding, but shook her head slightly. Independence doesn't have to mean isolation.
I'm beginning to think that's what my grandfather understood at the end, why he left me this place, why he wrote that letter. He wanted me to have roots, a connection to something larger than myself.
She turned to face Owen fully.
The truth is, I care for you and Lily more than I ever expected to care for anyone again, but I'm afraid too, afraid of depending on someone else after what happened in Boston. Afraid of not being enough, of somehow failing you both. Owen took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I understand fear, Pearl. I've lived with it every day since Sarah died, fear that something would happen to Lily, fear that I wouldn't be enough for her on my own. He squeezed her hand gently. But I'm tired of letting fear decide my future, aren't you? The simple question struck Pearl with the force of revelation. Yes, she was tired of fear, exhausted by it, in fact, tired of guarding her heart, of holding herself apart, of expecting betrayal around every corner. Yes, she whispered.
I am.
Owen's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual but transformative, illuminating his entire face. Then maybe we can be brave together.
Take things slowly, see where they lead.
Pearl nodded, a matching smile spreading across her own face. I'd like that very much. By late afternoon, the creek had receded enough to allow safe passage, and they reluctantly prepared to return to Wolf Creek. As they secured the cabin and loaded their tools into the wagon, Pearl found herself looking at the property with new eyes, seeing not just her inheritance or her personal refuge, but a possible future that included Owen and Lily as well. The journey back to town was filled with a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by observations about the storm's aftermath or plans for the next stage of repairs. But beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of newborn possibility, of doors opening where both had believed only walls remained. As they approached Wolf Creek, Pearl's thoughts turned practical again. What should we tell people about us? Owen considered this as he guided the horses through a puddle-strewn stretch of road. The truth, I suppose, that we're courting. He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty in his expression, if that's what you want to call it. Pearl felt a rush of warmth at the old-fashioned word. Courting, she repeated, testing it.
Yes, I think that describes it perfectly.
They collected Lily from Mrs. Turner, who took one look at their damp clothes and shared glances and raised a knowing eyebrow, but said nothing beyond offering them both hot coffee before they departed. That evening, after Lily was tucked into bed, Pearl and Owen sat by the fire at the ranch house, planning the next day's lessons for Pearl's students and discussing improvements to both their properties. To an outside observer, little might have seemed different from their previous evenings together, but Pearl felt the shift in every shared look, every accidental brush of their hands, every unspoken promise of a future neither had dared imagine before the storm. As spring gave way to summer, Pearl settled into a rhythm that balanced her teaching duties with continued work on her grandfather's property and increasing involvement in the Aldridge ranch. The cabin was now structurally sound with a new roof, repaired walls, and properly fitting doors and windows. The interior remained sparsely furnished, but Pearl had begun collecting pieces as her teacher's salary allowed. A new bed frame from the Wolf Creek carpenter, curtains she sewed herself from fabric ordered from Helena, a rocking chair nearly identical to her grandfather's that Owen had surprised her with on her birthday. Their courtship progressed with frontier directness, unencumbered by the elaborate rituals Pearl had known in Boston. Owen brought her wildflowers when they were in bloom, carved a beautiful wooden box similar to the one that had held her grandfather's letter, and once, memorably, recited Tennyson beneath a full moon after escorting her home from a town social. For her part, Pearl expressed her growing affection through 1,000 small gestures, mending his shirts with invisible stitches, preparing his favorite meals when she cooked at the ranch on Sundays, reading to Lily each night before bedtime, creating a sense of family that had been absent from the Aldridge home since Sarah's death. The town observed their courtship with largely approving eyes. A few raised eyebrows at the beginning, particularly from those who felt 3 years an insufficient mourning period, had given way to general acknowledgement that the young widower and the Eastern schoolteacher made a good match.
Even Mrs. Turner, initially protective of Sarah's memory, had grudgingly admitted that the household ran more smoothly with Pearl's influence. "Never seen Lily so happy," she told Pearl one afternoon as they prepared Sunday dinner together, or him, for that matter, not since before. By midsummer, Pearl had largely moved her belongings to the schoolhouse residence in town, though she spent most weekends at either the ranch or the cabin, continuing renovations and increasingly thinking of both places as home. It was on one such weekend, as July heat shimmered across the valley, that the peaceful life they were building faced its first serious threat. Pearl was at the cabin alone, having ridden out early to plant the kitchen garden she'd been planning for weeks. Owen and Lily were to join her for a picnic lunch later, after Owen completed his morning chores at the ranch. She was on her knees in the freshly turned soil, setting out tomato seedlings, when the sound of approaching horses made her look up, expecting to see her. What was Owen to her now? More than a friend, not yet a husband, but something solid and essential nonetheless. Instead, she found herself staring up at three mounted strangers, rough-looking men whose expressions sent a chill through her despite the summer heat. "Well, well," said the leader, a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw. "What have we here? A lady gardener all alone." Pearl rose to her feet, brushing soil from her hands with deliberate calmness she did not feel. "This is private property, gentlemen, my property." The men exchanged amused glances. "Your property, is it?" the scarred man asked. "Funny, we heard old Randall's place was abandoned, thought we might shelter here a spell." Something in his tone, a dangerous undercurrent beneath the casual words, told Pearl these were not simply travelers seeking temporary lodging. The way their eyes darted around, assessing the cabin and its surroundings, the rifles prominently displayed in their saddle scabbards, the tension in their postures, all spoke of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "As you can see, I'm in residence now. There's a town just 5 miles west, Wolf Creek. You'll find proper accommodations there." The second man, shorter but powerfully built, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto her freshly turned garden soil. "We ain't looking for proper accommodations, lady. We're looking for a place the law don't visit regular." The third man, who had remained silent, suddenly stiffened. "Caleb," he said sharply to the leader, "riders coming." "Two of 'em." Pearl's heart leapt with relief as she followed his gaze to see Owen and Lily approaching on horseback. Then, just as quickly, fear gripped her. Lily was with him. If these men were who she suspected, outlaws, quite possibly dangerous ones, the situation had just become infinitely more perilous. The leader, Caleb, cursed under his breath. "Who's that?" he demanded of Pearl. "Neighbors," she replied, unwilling to reveal Owen's importance to her, "coming to help with the planting." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Just neighbors, huh? Well, we'll just wait and say howdy." Owen's expression changed from relaxed to alert the moment he spotted the strangers. He slowed his horse, keeping Lily's pony slightly behind his own mount as they approached. "Afternoon," he called, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp as he assessed the three men. Pearl could see his right hand casually shift position, closer to where she knew he kept a small revolver in his saddle bag, not visible but accessible if needed. "Afternoon," Caleb returned with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just having a friendly chat with the lady here about accommodations." "Is that so?" Owen's gaze flicked to Pearl. "Everything all right, Miss Randall?" She noted his use of her formal name and followed his lead. "These gentlemen were just leaving, Mr. Aldridge. I directed them to Wolf Creek for proper lodging." Owen nodded, his expression pleasant but his body tense. "Good idea. Holloway's wife serves meals at the boarding house. Best food in the territory." "We ain't much for boarding houses," Caleb said, his pretense of friendliness slipping. "Prefer more private arrangements." "Papa," Lily said suddenly from behind Owen, "isn't that Mr. Harrison from the bank?" All heads turned to follow her pointing finger, where indeed another rider was approaching from the direction of town. The three strangers exchanged quick glances, and Pearl could see calculation in their eyes, weighing the arrival of another witness against whatever plans they had for the isolated cabin. "Well, seems like this place is busier than we expected," Caleb said finally, gathering his reins.
maybe we'll try our luck elsewhere. Wise decision, Owen replied evenly. Wolf Creek's a peaceful town. We like to keep it that way. The threat beneath his mild words was unmistakable, and Caleb's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Pearl feared the confrontation would escalate, but then the scarred man jerked his head at his companions. Let's ride, boys, too crowded here for my taste. The three wheeled their horses and rode off, not toward Wolf Creek but eastward, toward the mountains that marked the territory's boundary. Only when they were well out of sight did Pearl let out the breath she'd been holding. Owen dismounted quickly and strode to her side, his face tight with concern. Are you all right? Did they threaten you? Not directly, Pearl said, steadying herself with a hand on his arm, but their intentions were clear enough. If you and Lily hadn't arrived when you did, she couldn't finish the thought. Papa, who were those men? Lily asked, still seated on her pony. They looked mean. Just some travelers, Cricket, Owen assured her, though his expression told Pearl he believed otherwise. Nothing to worry about now. Mr. Harrison, the Wolf Creek bank manager, arrived moments later, looking puzzled. Was that the Blackwell gang I just saw riding away? What in blazes are they doing in these parts? Pearl felt Owen tense beside her. Blackwell. You're sure? Harrison nodded grimly. Caleb Blackwell and his crew. Recognized him from the wanted posters. They robbed the stage to Helena last month, killed the driver. There's a substantial bounty on them. Lily, Owen said with forced calmness, why don't you go check on your pony's water trough? Make sure it's full. The child, sensing the adults needed to talk privately, nodded and led her mount toward the small corral they'd built the previous month. Once she was out of earshot, Owen turned back to Harrison. They were here asking about staying at the cabin. Pearl was alone when they arrived. The banker's face paled. Dear God, you're fortunate, Miss Randall. Those men are known for more than robbery. What should we do? Pearl asked, her practical nature asserting itself despite the lingering fear. Alert the sheriff. Sheriff's away in Helena this week testifying at a trial, Harrison replied, but I'll send a wire to the territorial marshal when I get back to town. In the meantime, he hesitated. It might be best if you didn't stay out here alone, Miss Randall. She won't be, Owen said firmly. Pearl, pack what you need. You're coming back to the ranch, at least until we know those men have left the area. Pearl wanted to protest, to assert her independence, to prove she could handle frontier challenges, but prudence prevailed. All right, she agreed, just let me gather my things. Harrison departed shortly thereafter, promising to send word once the marshal had been contacted. Owen helped Pearl collect her gardening tools and the few personal items she'd brought for the day's work, his movements efficient but his expression troubled. I shouldn't have let you come out here alone, he said as they secured her belongings to her horse. Owen Aldridge, you don't let me do anything, Pearl replied, trying to inject some lightness into the tense atmosphere. I'm a grown woman who makes her own decisions. His expression softened slightly. I know that. It's one of the things he stopped, glancing at Lily, who was now feeding an apple to her pony. One of the things I admire about you, but those men are dangerous, Pearl. More dangerous than you know. Then we'll be cautious, she said practically. Stay together, alert the community. Isn't that how the frontier survives, by standing together? Owen's worried expression gave way to a reluctant smile. Using my own words against me, schoolteacher. Only when they're wise ones, Pearl replied, returning his smile. But as they mounted up to return to the ranch, she couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. The peaceful life they'd been building felt suddenly fragile, threatened by forces beyond their control. The following week passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Pearl temporarily moved into the Aldridge ranch, continuing to teach during the day but returning each evening to the safety of Owen's home rather than her quarters at the schoolhouse. Word came from the territorial marshal that he was pursuing the Blackwell gang, but sightings placed them across the border in Idaho territory. Just when they were beginning to believe the danger had passed, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. Pearl was teaching her students about geography, using a map of the United States to show the Western territories, when she noticed smoke rising from the direction of town. Within minutes, the school bell was ringing in alarm and parents began arriving to collect their children. Fire at the general store,
Mr. Peterson informed her as he gathered his sons. Everyone's needed to form a bucket brigade. Pearl quickly dismissed her students and hurried toward the center of town, where a crowd had already gathered. The general store was fully engulfed, flames leaping from windows and through the partially collapsed roof. "Where's Mr. Holloway?" she asked Mrs. Turner, who was filling buckets at the town pump. "Inside when it started," the older woman replied grimly. "Owen and some others went in after him, but—" She shook her head, her expression saying what her words did not. Pearl's heart froze. "Owen is in there?" She scanned the crowd desperately, looking for him or Lily. "Where's Lily?" "With the doctor's wife," Mrs. Turner assured her. "Safe at their house, but Owen—" Before she could finish, a section of the store's facade collapsed with a deafening crash, sending a shower of burning debris into the street. The crowd fell back, many crying out in horror, "Owen!" Pearl screamed, starting forward only to be restrained by Mr. Peterson. "Can't go in there, Miss Randall," he said firmly. "Building's coming down." Pearl struggled against his grip, fear clawing at her throat. "But Owen, he's still—" There, someone shouted, "The back door." Through the smoke and chaos, Pearl saw figures emerging from behind the store, 3 men, one supporting another between them. Owen was one of the 3, his face blackened with soot but very much alive. Peterson released her, and Pearl ran toward them, reaching the group as they lowered Mr. Holloway to the ground. The storekeeper was conscious but coughing violently, his clothes singed and his hair partially burned away. "Water," Owen gasped, his own voice rough from smoke. Pearl grabbed a ladle from a nearby bucket and helped Holloway drink while the town doctor pushed through the crowd to examine him. "You're hurt," she said to Owen, noticing for the first time the angry red burn on his forearm where his sleeve had been rolled up. He shook his head dismissively. "It's nothing. Holloway was trapped under a fallen beam. We had to—" A fit of coughing interrupted him. "Sit down before you fall down," Pearl ordered, guiding him to a bench outside the barber shop across the street. She dampened her handkerchief with water and gently cleaned some of the soot from his face, her hands trembling with relief and residual fear. "I'm all right," Owen assured her when he could speak again. "Really, Pearl. Just some smoke and a minor burn." "You could have been killed," she said, her voice breaking slightly. The reality of how close she'd come to losing him struck her with physical force. "When Mrs. Turner said you were in there." Owen caught her hand, stilling its nervous movement against his cheek. "But I wasn't. I'm right here." The tenderness in his smoke-roughened voice nearly undid her completely. Pearl blinked back tears, aware that half the town surrounded them but unable to maintain her usual composure. "Papa," Lily's voice cut through the crowd as she broke away from the doctor's wife and ran toward them. "Papa, you're all dirty." Owen caught his daughter in a one-armed embrace, keeping his burned arm away from her. "Just a little smoke, Cricket, nothing a bath won't fix." Lily studied him seriously, then turned to Pearl. "Is Papa really okay, Miss Pearl? You look scared." "He's really okay," Pearl assured her, managing a wobbly smile. "And I'm not scared anymore now that I can see you both." As the immediate crisis passed and the fire began to burn itself out, the store was beyond saving, but the bucket brigade had prevented it from spreading to adjacent buildings. Questions turned to the cause of the blaze. "Don't know how it started," Holloway told the assembled townspeople from his seat on the doctor's porch, a blanket around his shoulders despite the summer heat. "Was in the storeroom when I smelled smoke. By the time I got to the main floor, the front of the shop was already in flames." "Mighty suspicious timing," Harrison the banker observed. "Just a week after the Blackwell gang was in the area." A murmur ran through the crowd as connections were made. Arson as revenge for being turned away, or as a distraction for some other crime. The answer came minutes later when a rider galloped into town, his horse lathered from hard running. "Bank at Silver Creek's been robbed," he announced breathlessly, 3 men matching the Blackwell gang's description. "They shot the teller." Silver Creek lay 20 miles east, close enough that the smoke from Wolf Creek would have been visible from the hills between the towns. "They set our fire as a distraction," Owen said grimly, standing despite Pearl's protests. "Draw attention here while they hit Silver Creek. Harrison, is your bank secure?" The banker was already hurrying toward his establishment, calling for his clerks to verify that the safe remained untouched. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Wolf Creek organized itself for potential danger. Men with rifles patrolled the streets, families gathered children close, and every horseman approaching town was scrutinized from a distance. By evening, word came that the territorial marshal and a posse were in pursuit of the Blackwell gang, headed toward the Idaho border. Wolf Creek gradually relaxed its vigilance, though a watch was maintained throughout the night. Pearl helped Mrs. Turner prepare a simple supper for those gathered at the Aldridge Ranch, one of several homes serving as community gathering points until the all-clear came. Owen's burn had been properly bandaged by the doctor, and though he moved stiffly, he insisted on taking his turn at watch duty. "You're exhausted," Pearl protested as he checked his rifle. "You've inhaled smoke, your arm is burned." "And I'm still more use on watch than half the men out there," Owen replied, his tone gentle but firm. "I'll be back in 4 hours. Harrison will relieve me." Pearl wanted to argue further but recognized the futility. This was the reality of frontier life. Everyone did their part, regardless of personal discomfort or risk. It was one of the qualities she had come to admire most about her adopted home, even as it occasionally frustrated her. 4 hours, she agreed reluctantly, "and then you rest, Owen Aldridge, doctor's orders." A small smile touched his soot-smudged face. "Since when are you a doctor, Miss Randall?" "Since the actual doctor left me in charge of making sure you don't collapse from stubbornness," she retorted, but returned his smile. "Be careful." "Always am," he promised, and with a last glance at the sleeping Lily, he joined the other men heading out for the night watch. Left alone with her thoughts, Pearl found herself reflecting on the day's events, the terror of believing Owen trapped in the burning building, the overwhelming relief when he emerged alive, the visceral understanding of exactly how much she stood to lose if anything happened to him. She had come west seeking independence, a fresh start free from the constraints and disappointments of her Boston life. What she had found instead was a deeper understanding of interdependence, the way frontier communities survived by relying on one another, the strength that came from shared purpose and mutual support. And somewhere along the way, her heart had made decisions her rational mind was only now fully comprehending. Pearl Randall, who had sworn never again to depend on anyone after Daniel's betrayal, had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Owen Aldridge. The realization settled over her with the weight of absolute certainty. She loved him, his quiet strength, his gentle patience with Lily, his respect for Pearl's independence even as he offered his protection. She loved the life they were building, not as two separate individuals occasionally intersecting, but as partners creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The question that remained was whether Owen felt the same, whether his growing attachment to her arose from genuine love or merely from the practical advantages of their arrangement. He had lost so much with Sarah's death. Perhaps he simply wasn't capable of that kind of love again, even if he valued Pearl's presence in his and Lily's life. The uncertainty kept her awake long after the other women had settled into makeshift beds around the Aldridge home. When Owen finally returned from his watch duty, Pearl was still sitting by the dying fire, her thoughts miles away. "You should be sleeping," he said softly, setting his rifle in its usual place by the door. Pearl looked up, startled from her reverie. "So should you. How's your arm?" "Stinging, but the doctor says it's not serious." Owen sank into the chair opposite hers, fatigue evident in every line of his body. "No sign of the Blackwell gang. Marshall sent word they're tracking them into the mountains." "That's good news," Pearl said, studying his face in the firelight. Despite the exhaustion and lingering traces of soot, she thought he had never looked more handsome to her, more real, more essential to her happiness. "What is it?" Owen asked, catching her intent gaze. "Do I still have half the store's ashes on my face?" Pearl smiled and shook her head. "No, I was just thinking about today. About how I felt when I thought you might be." She couldn't bring herself to say the word. Owen's expression sobered. "I know, I'm sorry for frightening you." "Don't be sorry for being the kind of man who runs into a burning building to save another person," Pearl said firmly. "It's one of the reasons she hesitated, suddenly unsure if this was the right moment for such a declaration. "One of the reasons you what?" Owen prompted gently when she didn't continue. Pearl took a deep breath. "One of the reasons I love you," she said simply. The words hung in the space between them, impossible to recall once spoken. Pearl held Owen's gaze steadily, refusing to look away despite the hammering of her heart. For a long moment he didn't respond, and Pearl felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Had she misread everything, misinterpreted his growing affection as something deeper? Then Owen rose from his chair and crossed to kneel before her, taking her hands in his despite his injured arm. "Pearl Randall," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been trying to find the courage to say those words to you for weeks." The knot in Pearl's stomach dissolved, replaced by a flood of warmth. "You have." He nodded, a smile breaking across his tired face like sunrise. "I thought I'd never love again after Sarah. That part of me had died with her. And then you arrived with your Boston education and your determination to tame a wilderness homestead, and everything changed." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands as he continued. "Today, when the store collapsed and I thought I might not make it out, it wasn't my life flashing before my eyes. It was all the things I hadn't yet said to you. The future I wanted to build with you, if you'd have me." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than the fear that had threatened earlier. "I'd have you, Owen Aldridge." "With all my heart." He released her hands only to frame her face gently between his palms. "I love you, Pearl, and if you'll marry me, I promise to spend every day showing you just how much." "Yes," Pearl whispered, covering his hands with her own. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the promise between them, not the tentative exploration of their first kiss at the cabin, but a profound affirmation of shared futures and hearts finally, fully given. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I never expected to find this again," he murmured. "Never thought I'd want to." "Nor I," Pearl admitted. "After Daniel, I believed that love was a weakness, a way for others to hurt you. But that's not true, is it? Love is strength. It's what helps us endure the hardships of this life." Owen smiled, drawing back slightly to look into her eyes. "Now who's the wise one?" A soft noise from the hallway made them both turn. Lily stood in the doorway, tousle-haired and sleepy-eyed in her nightgown. "Papa, Miss Pearl." "Why are you still awake?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "Is the bad fireman back?" "No, Cricket," Owen assured her, rising to scoop his daughter into his arms despite his fatigue and injury. "Everything's safe. Miss Pearl and I were just talking." "About what?" Lily asked, ever curious. Pearl exchanged a glance with Owen, who nodded slightly. "About how much we love each other," she told the child gently. "And about how your father has asked me to marry him." Lily's eyes widened, all traces of sleep vanishing. "Really, truly?" She looked from Pearl to her father and back again. "Are you going to be my new mama?" The direct question caught Pearl by surprise. She had thought about becoming Owen's wife but hadn't fully considered what it would mean to step into the role of mother to this remarkable child. "If that's something you would want," she said carefully, "I could never replace your mother, Lily. But I would love to be a mother to you, in my own way." Lily considered this with the serious contemplation only a 6-year-old can bring to life's most important questions. "I think Mama would be happy," she decided finally. "She told Papa to be happy again before she went to heaven. Mrs. Turner said so." Owen's expression flickered with a complex mixture of emotions: grief for what was lost, gratitude for what remained, hope for what might be. "Mrs. Turner is right," he said softly. "Your mama wanted us both to be happy, even if she couldn't be with us anymore. And Miss Pearl makes us happy," Lily concluded with the straightforward logic of childhood. "So Mama would like her being my new mama too." "I think that's very wise," Pearl said, her own heart full to overflowing, "and I promise to try every day to deserve such a wonderful daughter." Lily beamed at this, then yawned hugely. "Can I be in the wedding?" Jenny Mitchell's sister got to carry flowers when her uncle got married. Owen laughed, the sound vibrating through the quiet house. "You can definitely carry flowers, Cricket. But right now you need to carry yourself back to bed. It's the middle of the night." After Lily had been tucked back in with promises of wedding planning in the morning, Owen and Pearl stood together in the hallway, hands clasped between them. "Are you certain?" Owen asked quietly. "About all of this: marriage, motherhood, a life that will always include Sarah's memory." Pearl squeezed his hands gently. "I'm certain about you, about us, the rest we'll figure out together. she smiled up at him. Besides, I think your daughter has already decided the matter for us. She is rather decisive, Owen agreed with a fond smile, like someone else I know. Then it's settled, Pearl said. Though perhaps we should wait until the Blackwell gang is apprehended before planning anything formal. I've had quite enough excitement for 1 week. Owen's expression sobered at the reminder of the danger that still lurked on the territory's periphery. Agreed, and until then, you and your grandfather's cabin are staying right here where I can keep you both safe. Pearl might have bristled at such protectiveness once, but now she recognized it for what it was, not a denial of her independence, but an expression of love from a man who had already lost too much. I think that's wise, she agreed, though we'll need to work out a more permanent arrangement eventually, 2 properties, 1 family. We'll sort it out, Owen assured her. Together. The word echoed between them, carrying all the promise of their shared future, a future neither had believed possible when Pearl first stepped off the train in Wolf Creek. Together. The capture of the Blackwell gang a week later brought a sense of relief to Wolf Creek and the surrounding territory. The marshal and his posse had cornered the outlaws in a narrow canyon, resulting in a brief but intense gunfight that left Caleb Blackwell wounded and his companions surrendering rather than face certain death. News of their apprehension reached Wolf Creek via telegraph, prompting an impromptu celebration at the saloon for the men and a special prayer of thanksgiving at Sunday services. Life gradually returned to normal, or what passed for normal in a frontier community accustomed to periodic threats and challenges. For Pearl and Owen, the weeks following their engagement were filled with practical preparations for their shared future. After much discussion, they decided that the Aldridge Ranch would remain their primary home, while Pearl's cabin would be completed as a summer residence and potential source of income as the territory developed. The valley is perfect for additional grazing, Owen explained as they rode the boundaries of their combined properties one golden September afternoon. With both parcels together, we could double the herd within 5 years. Pearl nodded, seeing the landscape through his experienced eyes. And the cabin could serve as a line shack for ranch hands during calving season, or perhaps eventually as a home for a foreman if the operation grows as you envision. Owen smiled at her practical assessment. You're thinking like a rancher already, schoolteacher. I'm thinking like your partner, Pearl corrected him, which is what I intend to be in all things. The month since their engagement had only deepened Pearl's certainty that she had found her true place, not just in Montana territory, but at Owen's side. Their temperaments complemented each other perfectly, her intellectual approach balancing his experiential wisdom, his patience tempering her occasional impetuosity. And Lily had blossomed in the certainty of their united affection. The child had appointed herself official wedding planner, solemnly informing them that Pearl must have flowers in her hair, like a princess, and that Owen needed new boots because yours are all scuffed, Papa. The town had received news of their engagement with wholehearted approval. Even Mrs. Turner, initially so protective of Sarah's memory, had grudgingly admitted that Pearl was good for both of them and offered to bake the wedding cake herself. Plans were set for a mid-October ceremony, after harvest but before the first heavy snows made travel difficult for those coming from outlying areas. Pearl had written to her few remaining friends in Boston, though she expected none would be able to make the journey on such short notice. Her only true family now was here in Wolf Creek, in the community that had welcomed her and the man and child who had claimed her heart. As the wedding day approached, Pearl divided her time between teaching, final preparations at the cabin, and assembling a modest trousseau from fabrics ordered from Helena. Mrs. Turner and several other women from town helped with the sewing, turning the practical task into social gatherings filled with advice, some useful, some amusingly outdated, and stories of their own frontier marriages. The night before the wedding, Pearl stayed at her schoolhouse quarters for the final time. Tradition dictated that she and Owen should not see each other on their wedding day until the ceremony, though both privately considered the superstition somewhat foolish after all they had already faced together. Nevertheless, Pearl found herself enjoying this quiet moment of anticipation, this pause between her old life and the new one beginning tomorrow. She had come west seeking independence and found instead something far more precious, interdependence with a man who valued her strength even as he offered his own in return. As she prepared for bed, a knock sounded at her door. Wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, Pearl cautiously approached. "Who is it?" "It's me," came Lily's voice, "and Papa, but he's not looking," he promised. Smiling at this interpretation of wedding traditions, Pearl opened the door to find Lily in her nightgown with a coat hastily thrown over it, and Owen standing a few paces back, deliberately facing away from the door. "What are you two doing here so late?" Pearl asked, ushering Lily inside while keeping her shawl tightly closed. "We brought you something," Lily announced importantly, "for tomorrow." "Papa says it's traditional." Owen's voice came from outside, still facing away. "It's meant to be delivered by a female relative of the groom, since I'm short on those," Lily volunteered. The little girl solemnly handed Pearl a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with blue ribbon. "It's something old," she explained, "for luck." Pearl unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Opening it revealed a tiny painted portrait of a woman who could only be Sarah, dark-haired and smiling, her eyes the same hazel as Lily's. "Oh," Pearl breathed, understanding immediately the significance of the gift. "Lily, I'm not sure." "Papa says Mama would want you to have it," Lily interrupted with the certainty of childhood. "Because you're going to be my mother now, and that makes you family, and family shares." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes at the simple explanation that somehow encompassed the complex emotions involved in blending their lives together. "It's beautiful," she managed. "I'll treasure it, Lily." "Sarah would want you to have it," Owen called softly from outside, "to know that you have our blessing, hers, mine, and Lily's." Pearl blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the generosity of spirit in this gift. "Thank you," she said, knowing the words were inadequate but finding no others. "Thank you both." After Lily had been persuaded to return home, "But I want to have a sleepover with Miss Pearl." "Not tonight, Cricket. Tomorrow she'll be home with us for good." Pearl sat on the edge of her bed, the locket cradled in her palm. It was an extraordinary gesture, this acknowledgement of what came before, this inclusion of Sarah's memory in their new beginning. Many men would have tried to erase all traces of a previous marriage, to start fresh as if the past had never happened. But Owen understood that Sarah would always be part of who he was, part of who Lily was becoming. And now, with this gift, he had found a way to make her part of who they would be together, not as a shadow or a comparison, but as the foundation upon which their happiness had been built. Pearl carefully fastened the locket around her neck, letting it rest against her skin as she prepared for her last night of solitude. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Owen Aldridge, a transformation both profound and in many ways simply an acknowledgement of what had already grown between them. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with the aspens in the surrounding hills turned to gold by autumn's touch. Pearl woke early, watching the sunrise paint her small room in shades of amber and thinking of all that had brought her to this moment. Mrs. Turner arrived shortly after breakfast, along with several other women from town, all bearing gifts and offers of assistance. They helped Pearl bathe and dress in the simple but elegant gown they had created together, ivory silk ordered from Helena, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned Mrs. Harrison's own wedding dress. "Something borrowed," the banker's wife had explained as she carefully sewed the delicate fabric onto Pearl's gown. "And it brought George and me 25 years of happiness, so perhaps some of that luck will transfer to you and Owen." Now, as Pearl stood before the small mirror in her quarters, she scarcely recognized the woman reflected back at her. Her golden hair had been arranged in an elegant knot with small white wildflowers woven through it just as Lily had requested. Sarah's locket nestled at her throat and a blue ribbon, something blue, from Mrs. Turner was tied around her bouquet of late-blooming asters and golden aspen leaves. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Turner said, her usual brisk manner softened by the occasion. "A proper bride for a good man." "Thank you," Pearl replied, smoothing the silk skirt with hands that trembled slightly. "For everything, Mrs. Turner, for welcoming me, for helping with Lily, for—" she gestured at her appearance. "For all of this." The older woman's eyes misted unexpectedly. "Well," she said gruffly, "someone had to make sure you didn't show up at your own wedding looking like you'd just come from gardening at that cabin of yours." Pearl laughed, recognizing the affection beneath the tart words. Heaven forbid. It's time, Mrs. Harrison announced from the doorway. The buggy is here to take you to the church. Wolf Creek's small church had been transformed for the occasion with autumn arrangements, golden leaves, late wildflowers, and evergreen boughs creating a rustic elegance that perfectly suited the frontier community and the couple being joined there. As the buggy approached, Pearl could see that nearly the entire town had turned out for the event. People stood in small groups outside the church, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces bright with anticipation. This was more than just a wedding, it was a community celebration, an affirmation of life continuing despite the hardships and dangers of frontier existence. Mr. Harrison, acting as Pearl's surrogate father, helped her from the buggy and offered his arm. "Ready, Miss Randall?" he asked with a warm smile. "Your groom is waiting rather impatiently inside." Pearl took a deep breath, steadying herself for this final step of her journey. "Ready," she confirmed, and together they ascended the church steps. The small building fell silent as Pearl entered, all eyes turning to take in the bride's appearance. But Pearl saw only Owen, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as she began her walk toward him. Beside him, Lily practically bounced with excitement in her new blue dress, her own small bouquet clutched in hands that couldn't quite stay still. When she caught Pearl's eye, she gave an enthusiastic wave that sent a ripple of fond laughter through the congregation. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Pearl. She remembered the warmth of Owen's hands holding hers, the steadiness of his voice as he repeated his vows, the weight of the simple gold band as he slid it onto her finger. She remembered Lily's important role delivering the rings, the child's solemn concentration giving way to a beaming smile when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Most of all, she remembered the moment when Owen kissed her, not the brief, chaste kiss expected at frontier weddings, but a lingering promise that spoke of all they had overcome and all they had yet to build together. The celebration afterward spilled from the church to the town square, where tables had been set up for a community feast. Mrs. Turner's wedding cake held pride of place, 3 tiers of white frosting decorated with sugar flowers and fresh berries, while every family in Wolf Creek had contributed to the meal. As the autumn afternoon stretched into evening, with music from fiddles and harmonicas filling the square, Pearl found herself surrounded by well-wishers and drawn into dance after dance. She danced with her new husband, of course, but also with Mr. Harrison, with the doctor, with every prominent man in town who wanted to welcome the schoolteacher as Mrs. Aldridge. It was during a rare moment of respite, as she stood catching her breath at the edge of the makeshift dance floor, that Pearl spotted a familiar figure approaching from the direction of the telegraph office. "Marshall," she greeted him with surprise. "I didn't realize you were in Wolf Creek." The territorial marshal, a weathered man with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, doffed his hat. "Just arrived, Mrs. Aldridge, wanted to offer my congratulations in person," he smiled. "And to deliver some news that might serve as a wedding gift of sorts." Oh, Pearl's curiosity was piqued. "The Blackwell trial concluded yesterday in Helena," the marshal informed her, "all 3 convicted on multiple counts. They'll be hanging before Christmas." A complex mixture of emotions washed through Pearl at this news. Relief that the men who had threatened her home and indirectly caused the fire that nearly claimed Owen's life would never trouble the territory again, coupled with a certain solemnity at the finality of their punishment. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. The marshal nodded, understanding the nuance of her response. "Frontier justice isn't always pretty, Mrs. Aldridge, but it allows good people like you and your husband to build something worthwhile out here." He gestured to the celebration around them. "This community, family, new beginnings, this is what we're protecting." As the marshal moved on to share his news with others, Owen appeared at Pearl's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Yes," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "The marshal brought news that the Blackwell gang has been convicted." Owen's arm tightened slightly around her. "Good. One less thing to worry about as we start our life together." Pearl turned to face him fully, reading the deeper emotions beneath his pragmatic response. Does it ever strike you as strange how much has changed in just 6 months? When I stepped off that train in April, you were a Boston lady determined to claim her independence, Owen finished for her, a smile softening his features. And I was a widower equally determined to need no one. And now look at us, Pearl marveled, glancing around at the community gathered to celebrate their union. So much for our carefully constructed plans. I prefer the reality, Owen said softly, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that still made her heart race. Every unexpected bit of it. Before Pearl could respond, Lily appeared beside them, her face flushed from dancing and her dress slightly rumpled from a day of celebration. Papa, Miss Pearl, I mean Mama, Mr. Holloway says it's time to cut the cake, she announced, taking each of their hands and tugging them toward the central table. And then we can all go home together, right? To our home. That's right, Cricket, Owen confirmed, allowing himself to be led by his daughter. All of us together from now on. As they crossed the square, with Lily between them and the entire community of Wolf Creek looking on with approval, Pearl felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had been seeking all along, though she hadn't known it when she left Boston, not just a place to belong but people to belong with. The cabin that had initially represented her independence now symbolized something far more valuable, a legacy from her grandfather that had led her not to isolation, but to connection, not to self-sufficiency, but to the richer sustenance of family and community. Together, she and Owen and Lily cut the wedding cake, feeding each other the first bites in the time-honored tradition while their neighbors applauded and called out good-natured advice for married life. As the evening stars began to appear above the celebration, Pearl caught Owen's eye over Lily's head and saw in his expression all the love and promise she felt in her own heart. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Aldridge?" he asked quietly when the formal festivities had concluded and guests were beginning to depart. "More than ready, Mr. Aldridge," Pearl replied, taking his offered hand. With Lily skipping ahead of them and the good wishes of Wolf Creek following behind, they walked together toward the waiting wagon that would carry them to the ranch, to the home they would build together, day by day, season by season, year by year. As they drove away from town, Pearl leaned her head against Owen's shoulder, watching the first stars brighten against the deepening blue of the Montana sky. 6 months ago, she had believed herself destined for a solitary life, her heart closed to the possibility of love after betrayal and loss. But a chance encounter in a general store, a child's simple observation, "She needs us, Papa," and the courage to reach beyond past hurts had changed everything. The road ahead would not always be easy. The frontier demanded resilience, adaptation, and courage from all who sought to build lives here. But Pearl knew now that she would not face those challenges alone. Whatever came, harsh winters, summer droughts, the everyday trials of ranching life, they would face it together, their strength multiplied by the bonds between them. As the ranch house came into view, its windows glowing with welcoming light, Pearl felt a sense of homecoming deeper than any she had ever known. This was where she belonged, not just in this place, but with these people who had opened their hearts to her as she had opened hers to them. "Welcome home," Owen said softly as he helped her down from the wagon, Lily already racing ahead to open the door. Pearl looked up at the man who had become her husband, at the child who had become her daughter, at the house that had become her home, and felt the final pieces of her heart settle into place. "Thank you," she whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him in the starlight, "for everything." Hand in hand, they walked up the path to their home, to the future they would build together. A future neither had imagined possible until a lonely woman from Boston and a grieving Montana rancher found in each other the courage to love again.